Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of the Audio Epic Storytelling Podcast. Today's episode is the second part in a two-part conversation. Well, we recorded it as one big conversation, and then I split it up because it was a bit long. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, you might want to do that first before listening to this one. Okay, and here is Storytelling Viewpoints, Part 2.
To wrap these points of view up, what actually is your favorite point of view that you would use or that you like in particular when reading?
Third person, it could be either the storyteller or the limited perspective. I like both, although I would have to say, while there's something appealing about the sort of liberty you get in the omniscient storyteller, I think the limited perspective is probably what I enjoy most because of the element of tension that you can get a little bit better. But yeah, it's between these two for me. I don't like first person.
You don't? Why not?
It's just, it doesn't really work for me. Maybe I don't have enough empathy or something, but I can't really experience a story through the eyes of another character in the story. To me, it feels awkward and jarring. I cannot get into that. It's very strange.
Yeah, it takes a level of immersion because you kind of...
It takes
You merge with that character.
It takes a level of, it's more than just immersion. It's really identifying with the character to such an extent that you become the character. I can't do that. I'm just not like that.
Oh, I don't have trouble doing that, and not just with characters like Katniss, who are more like I am myself, perhaps. But also with for example, David in Reckoners. He's a guy and he's a geek and he knows everything about guns and he's obsessed with these epics. And I have no trouble at all identifying with a guy like that.
For me, it's a bit like, in movies there's been this sort of experiment with movie. With the camera angle. Apparently, audiences empathize more and more with a character the closer they get to their gaze, to their eyes. But the moment when the character completely turns to the audience and looks directly at you, into the camera, that empathy is gone. It's very strange, but
but that's logical. Characters are not supposed to look into the camera if you want to feel immersed, because you have to look through their eyes.
The closer they come to actually looking into the camera, the more you empathize.
Really?
Yeah, I learned that once, but when you go all the way, then suddenly the whole spell breaks. And for me, first person is that. It's sort of the whole thing falls apart for me. Whereas third person limited makes me empathize more.
No, I think first person is more like what they do in the Hunger Games, for example. The movie adaptation. I thought it was a brilliant screen adaptation of the way they used the camera was exactly like the point of view in the novel. I was actually watching a first person present tense narrator, which I thought was really awesome.
Yeah, for me that didn't work at all. I mean, I liked the movie for for various reasons. I thought it was, the acting was really good and the designs were good and the music was good and all of that. But I hated the camera work. I really hated it. Because it was so choppy and so confusing, and it made me physically sick, actually.
Whoa. Does that mean we actually disagree on something? I loved it. I thought it was really, really well done. I think we might need to get a divorce for this. I mean, aren't we supposed to agree all the time?
I don't know. I'm scared. We've never been here before.
Me too.
I don't know what to do now.
Let's call a lawyer or something.
Yeah, let's keep one handy, just in case.
Or maybe let's talk about points of view in different media. And,
Yeah, best be
and,
safe,
and
yeah.
leave this
Yeah, best be
scary
safe.
topic behind.
Okay. So,
Shall we talk about visual media first?
yeah,
Because there's a thing like there's point of view in the story, and you have point of view in the visuals, and that's very interesting as well to talk about.
Yeah, that's why I immediately thought of video games, because in video games, very often you have you have first person and third person games, and
So a limited narrator then, actually.
well, it's not about narration; it's about the camera point of
Yeah,
view.
the camera point of view.
But I would say it's similar to narration in a
Mhm.
book in the sense that it changes how you experience the story. Um,
And I guess a first or third person would be more immersive that way.
yeah, yeah. I have to say, in games, a first person would be like a lot of shooters are like that. Most old-fashioned shooters, like Doom and Wolfenstein, and then the earlier Call of Duty games. That was always first person,
Mhm.
and then third person is more something like Lara Croft, where you sort of follow the character.
But we're talking about a quote-unquote limited point of view, right? Because the omniscient variant would be like a top-down overview of the scene and then watching the characters.
Well,
do
that's
their
interesting. That's an interesting way to put it because, indeed, the third-person limited is what you would get in a game like Castlevania or
Yeah.
Tomb Raider or whatever, and then the third-person omniscient would be you could translate as what you get in strategy games or in certain top-down role-playing games like Baldur's Gate, etc.
Yeah, like the games that focus on looting more than immersion.
Well, I wouldn't say that Baldur's Gate necessarily focuses on loot, but Diablo does, and that's also from a top-down perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking about dungeon crawlers specifically.
Right. Yeah.
Which often use a very top-down perspective to
Yeah.
kind of reveal these hidden doors
In
and chambers.
in the case of something like Baldur's Gate, it's really the top-down is you control an entire party of heroes, and what they do and
right,
and that's why it's top-down.
And Divinity Original Sin still uses this as well. Although
Yes.
you have the ability to zoom in, which kind of makes it a bit more immersive when you're in the middle of a battle, for example, which I like.
Yeah. BioWare also kind of found a middle road when they did the Knights of the Old Republic and Dragon Age, where it's third person and you sort of you control an entire party, but you also see them from closer. So there are very, very, very different ways to do this.
I would say in a game, my absolute favorite point of view would be a first-person limited then. For example, in Skyrim, you
seeing
can...
through the eyes of the character,
You can choose between a first-person or a third-person limited because you can also zoom out and watch your character actually going through all these adventures. But I always use the first person where you can see the entire game from the eyes of the character, and thus you're more immersed into the story, I think.
Well, here's the strange thing for me. Theoretically, I would prefer third person, but being close to the character.
Mm-hmm.
I like being able to see my character, the cool new armor that I've got, but in actuality, when I play a Bethesda game, Fallout or Elder Scrolls, I always play first person.
Yeah, right.
Because it feels more natural. It feels more like I'm actually experiencing this. Is this
Exactly.
really happening?
I've watched you play, but I noticed that sometimes you just hit that third person button just to watch your armor and your
Yeah,
queen.
yeah, exactly.
You can
Just
still
to
do
see how
that.
cool I look,
That's
and I go back to first person. Yeah, it's strange how you experience these things.
and what's also interesting is maybe to talk about multiple viewpoints in games.
Do you mean? Yeah. Well, like I said, an example is if you look at Dragon Age or Knights of the Old Republic.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a party. You
Mhm.
control different characters, and you can sort of switch to the different perspectives of each character during a combat situation.
Right.
I mean, you don't look through their eyes, but you're close to that character.
Yeah.
And over the shoulder, which really is makes you identify with that character.
So you're actually able to switch character perspective in those games. I never really liked that.
Yeah, it's a bit weird for me as well, to be honest.
I like to focus on one character and
Me
then go
too.
through the game.
Me
and-
too.
And have followers that I can boss around. That's
So,
usually more fun.
what really worked for me, and I think that's a sort of perspective that I really like, is a game like, for example, within role-playing games, because other games do this too, but within role-playing games, something like Kingdoms of Amalur, for example, or Fable, or Divinity Dragon Knight Saga, is when the camera is locked to your one character. You play one character, that's you, and you sort of follow that character around with the camera really close to that character. Like Mass Effect is like that also. You play Commander Shepard, you're always close. And The Witcher also. The Witcher does that with Geralt. You always follow that character around.
And The Witcher also uses multiple viewpoints, right? Because, but then in the cutscenes and gameplay.
You mean storytelling viewpoints, really? I mean, you get to see what other characters.
Yeah, because I remember you. I've not played it very long, but I remember you playing on and being able to pick or to play series point of view in the game at
In Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that's to me that for that particular story that kind of took me out of the feeling of role playing, of being in that sort of chase situation.
Yeah, I understand. Also because she really kicked ass, and you were like, "Why are you trying to save this?"
She
girl?
doesn't need rescuing.
She doesn't need rescuing.
Exactly. But I mean, Mass Effect 2 had a scene where you play as Joker, the ship's captain, for one brief part. And I thought it was original because, Joker is, he has a disability, so he can't run. And you're being chased by aliens, and so it makes it very tense.
Wow, that's scary.
But it took me out of the feeling of I'm Commander Shepard. So
Yeah.
I don't really like that. I don't like cutscenes either. That's one of the reasons why I like Skyrim and Oblivion so much. Is there are no cutscenes ever. You're always in your character.
Yeah,
Always.
I like it when they make a clear distinction between a game and a movie. So
Yeah.
let's talk about movies.
Yes, movies, because for the people who don't play games, they've been snoring for the past 10 minutes.
Wake up! It's about movies now.
Yeah, movies do very interesting things with point of view through the camera.
Yeah.
I always like to use the example of E.T. When Steven Spielberg explained that when he made E.T., he put all the cameras very low to the ground throughout the entire movie. It's kind of interesting. You don't really notice that. You don't think about that when you watch it. But it's true. If you analyze it, the cameras are always low to the ground, and that's because the entire movie is intended to be seen from the perspective of a child.
That's interesting. Yeah. And indeed, a lot of these original things they do with camera work when it comes to point of view are barely noticeable unless you really start paying attention to it.
Yes.
It's like when I did the paper on the New World, when I was doing film studies, when you start really analyzing a movie and paying close attention to the camera work, you actually notice there's a lot of things directors decide doing with their camera to invoke certain emotions or ideas that really, really work, but you're just not aware of it.
Right, yeah.
And that's really interesting.
One thing that comes to mind for me is how in horror movies you have the typical scene where you see, for example, a bunch of people by a campfire and you see them through the eyes of the monster lurking in the bushes.
Yeah.
And you hear some breathing. You know.
I think in general, horror or slasher traditionally uses a first-person visual point of view of the monster or creature to invoke a sense of being watched. I think the X-Files does that a lot in the preview.
But isn't that interesting that the sense of being watched is created by filming it through the eyes of the watcher?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very strange how visual media work.
Yeah,
isn't
it works
it?
very differently from a novel that way.
Yeah, if you would write a scene from the viewpoint of the monster, you wouldn't get the sense of being watched. You'd get the sense of being a monster. So it's very bizarre how that works.
Of course, they also use camera perspective to make you feel scared and helpless, like in the Blair Witch Project. It helps you to identify with the terrible situation at hand, the characters. I don't think it really works that way. I didn't really feel more immersed because of the camera angle. It was
I haven't seen it.
Very confusing, I thought.
I haven't seen it, but
I
to be honest,
understand the intention of it.
I'm trying to imagine a first-person movie, and I think if you don't see the character, you don't identify with them at all.
No, there's different characters, of course. I think you immerse more with the situation and the emotion, but not as much with the characters because I don't really remember what they were like. So for me, it didn't really work that way, but I thought it was a very nice experiment. It's been done again afterwards.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
What worked more for me to invoke terror is a more, I would say, omniscient viewpoint in that movie The Strangers, which was awful because I nearly squeezed the hand of my dad to bits because I was so scared. And there's this scene where you see this kitchen and the people in the house are terrorized by, actually you don't know what. It's very confusing. So the narrative has a limited point of view in the sense that you don't know what's going on and you're scared with the characters of the movie. But then the visuals, you see the scene in the kitchen where the characters are present and you can see one of the bad guys just standing there in the background with a mask. And he's just standing there. And that's really scary.
Yeah, it seems to me like that's something they do a lot in horror these days.
It creates a distance, but still it gives you the chills.
Yeah, sort of the shocking element thrown in almost incidentally, almost like it's nothing special, making it more shocking in a way.
Right.
Yeah. I think I see what you mean.
And when it comes to points of view in narration in movies, I think using an omniscient or limited narrator actually in a movie occurs more in the older or more artistic movies like Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain and Mathilda by Roald Dahl, the the movie with Danny DeVito, they have a narrator and they use a voiceover to do that.
So the voiceover could be a sort of detached narrator,
Yeah.
or it could be the main character
Yeah.
reflecting on. Yeah. Well, it's done in The Lord of the Rings as well.
Yeah. Right.
It begins with Galadriel
Mhm.
as the narrator. She takes you into this ancient history.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what people forget is that towards the end, all the way at the end of Return of the King, you have Frodo as a narrator. You get Frodo's voiceover, sort of looking back on the whole experience.
Right, you have different ones in the Lord of the Rings. And it works.
And in The Hobbit, you get Bilbo's sort of reflection on what it was like
Yeah.
in the opening scenes. So
Also typical in movies is when they use a voiceover to reflect the thoughts of characters, and then you see that the mouth of the character is not moving.
yeah, that can be fun, especially in comedies, I think. When someone thinks all kinds of horrible things, but is acting really polite, for example.
Yeah.
So you can do funny things with that. Okay, we've talked about movies. Let's talk about the medium that people always forget, except for our lovely fans, of course, audio.
Yeah, and we can talk about both audio drama and audiobooks. I think in audiobooks, a narrator is normal.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have an audiobook.
You wouldn't have an audiobook, so
Yeah.
it's expected. But in audio drama, there's this kind of... A lot of people have this allergy towards narrators. They really don't want a narrator in audio drama because they think that's the distinction between an audiobook and an audio drama, and it should be respected.
Audio drama fans always say that the narrator takes them out of the immediacy of the experience, and they want the immediate experience of a story is just happening. You're in it, it's unfolding before your ears, and the narrator would kind of take you out of that. Personally, I don't agree with that, but I have a minority opinion in the audio drama world. For me, I need a narrator. To me, the narrator is my anchor into the story. Because if I don't have that, then I can't imagine what's happening. I need a narrator to sort of establish what things look like, what things feel like, where we are exactly, to tell me a little bit about the setting, about the world, and then you can sort of let the story unfold through the action. But if you don't have that at all, a narrator, then very quickly I think you fall into one of two traps. The first one is that the characters start narrating everything that they do, which is
what's
very...
this?
Yeah.
I haven't seen this here before.
Yeah.
It looks like a stone,
Yeah.
but it's white and
Yeah.
it has red spots
So
on it.
why are you taking that gun out? Why are you pointing it at me? That kind of stuff, which is very unnatural and feels very fake.
Right.
Or you go to the other extreme and you don't explain anything, and the sounds just have to do the storytelling. And then, that's not possible. And what you get is just this bunch of noise, people screaming, and you have no idea what's going on. And I think that's even worse because I just space out I lose track of the entire story.
Yeah, that happens a lot, actually.
And and to me, that's my problem with modern audio drama, is it tends to be like that. And as lovely as the stories are, and as great as the sound design is, that just doesn't work for me. So give me a narrator to help me understand and get me into the atmosphere. And so, that's the way I see it.
I think part of the problem is also that lots of people who write audio drama have been trained to write movie scripts. And it's an entirely different medium, so you really have to reckon with you having to tell the story through sound and not through visuals. So if you visually describe things,
yes,
you have to really pay attention to that, because
Yes.
the audio designer
yes.
can often not create the exact
Yes.
sound that you visually want to represent.
Yes, things like she nodded or he looked around or you know, you can't actually
She
hear
looked
that.
very insecure.
Yeah.
So then the
Yeah, I
sound
mean,
designer has to make her sound insecure.
you can convey that in the
Yeah.
acting, etc. But you constantly have to be aware of this massive handicap
Yeah.
that the listener has. So, but as for storytelling viewpoints in audio drama, that's something that hasn't really been discussed very much, is it?
Yeah, because I think there's a big overlap between audio drama, audiobooks, and on the one hand, and narrative points of view in books.
Yeah, if
novels.
you use a narrator, but if you don't use it, if you don't have a narrator, can you convey different viewpoints? I wonder.
Probably
Purely in the sound, I guess so.
by playing with where the sound comes from, for example.
Yeah. You could sort of have the microphone stay with one character, like a camera stays with one character.
Yeah.
Um,
And like what you did with Mirilia in The Will of the Woods, when she was underneath the cloak and something outside of the cloak was
Yeah.
happening, and you had the point of view from outside the cloak where the wraith was,
yeah.
and then from inside where she
Yeah,
was.
what we did there is we switched the viewpoint.
Yeah.
I hope that was clear to the listener because we didn't explain that. But you got this perspective of Mirilia, so you hear the cloak being wrapped around her, and then you hear these noises outside,
Yeah.
and they're sort of
It's more
dull.
muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get the Wraith's perspective, and you hear the voices very clearly. And Mirilia's voice is sort of muted from underneath his cloak when she addresses him.
This looks dangerous.
Hide under my cloak. I will keep you safe.
Wraith, what about you? Are you safe?
Wraith? Wraith? Wraith, are you all right?
The mist is gone. We're safe.
I heard horrid things. Did you see anything?
Don't ask, Mirilia. It was terrible. Like a wave of evil washing over me.
And if it wasn't clear to the listener, then that's probably some more proof that it's really hard to do this.
It is.
audio.
There's such a thing as maybe you need to listen to a lot of audio drama to sort of learn how to listen to it, sort of learn how to extract the story from pure sound. That might be true. I'm not sure. And another way to sort of convey a viewpoint in audio is using 3D audio, where you can actually put the listener into the experience and make the listener the main character by having sounds coming at you and behind you and, you know,
And underneath
and
you,
underneath you,
around you.
and from within you, maybe if you had too many Mexican beans.
Okay, so that's relatively new, right?
Yeah, it's something that Michel Lafrance of the Owlfield is doing. First-person audio drama, and that's exactly what he's going for.
Yeah, like in the fairy tree.
Yeah, the fairy tree is actually also an interactive one. If you like Will of the Woods, you might like this. It's something that we helped with the script. We wrote it, and then he created it, and it's a good example of a first-person interactive audio drama with a second-person narrator, because there's a narrator who sort of tells you are the hero, and yeah, it's a very unique experience.
So it's a modern 3D audio choose your own adventure fairy tale kind of thing.
Yeah, or think of it as a video game without video. Of course, it's not as expansive as a video game. It's much more limited. It'll take about 30 minutes to go through the adventure, but you can do it 3 or 4 times, and it's different every time.
Yeah, and there's a narrator, right, who talks about you, and you have a first-person experience, and your character doesn't really speak or react as a consequence.
No, yeah, that's of course the downside. And I try to address that in the script by having other characters say things like, "Oh, you don't talk much, do you?" Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the only way to kind of get around that.
Yeah.
The time for talk has ended, champion. It is time to decide, my young friend. The fate of our queen, the fate of our people, the fate of our land lies in your hands. Which one of us will be your companion on this most important journey?
The time has come to make your first choice. Choose wisely, as you can choose but one companion for your journey. A journey for the Queen, a journey for the realm, a journey for survival. To choose the bold warrior Brutus, select Chapter 2. To choose the wise wizard Magisterius, select Chapter 9.
Okay, so we've been talking for a long time now about storytelling viewpoints. Who would have thought that this would have been a topic that had so much, to say about it?
Yeah, it's very interesting, but again, we want to emphasize there's no need if you're a writer for any of these media to start from the theory of using a point of view. You can also just start writing and then decide and just make it consistent. I think that's the most important thing, that you make it consistent. And I think knowing the upsides and downsides of each point of view is a very good tool to decide which one you eventually want to pick.
Yes, and for anyone who's interested in writing, especially if you want to write fantasy, a lot of what we said comes from Brandon Sanderson's lectures, and I really recommend them. They're on YouTube for free. Go to the channel Camera Panda, yeah, like movie camera and then panda. Camera Panda, and there you can watch all of his lectures, and he talks about viewpoints for among many other things.
Okay, so I think it's time to wrap this up. I still have to contact my lawyer for the terrible disagreement we had.
I'll just give you a makeup kiss. There.
That's so cheap.
Well, it's cheaper than a lawyer. Okay, so this was this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back.
Bye.
Bye.
That was this week's episode. Again, I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back next week. If you enjoy our own dramatized audiobooks and audio dramas, you can find them on Bandcamp, audioepics.bandcamp.com. You can find the books if you like to read on Amazon. Just type in, Witch Hunter and then my name, Domien de Groot. And you can just listen to our stories right here on this channel, on this podcast. So I wish you all a wonderful week, and until next time, this is Domien signing off.